what's the perception in Israel as you're going back there? Is there a concern that if this regime is in its last throes, that they could use chemical weapons or they could pass them on to Hezbollah?
Who knows?
Yeah.
The Middle East, the sands of the Middle East are very tricky. I don't think anybody really knows how that will develop. I don't think we know yet how things are going to develop in Egypt. But there are definitely very, very big changes occurring in the Middle East. And I think that the big lesson is that no matter who is in power, the people are now much more aware of what's happening, and the people of the Middle East know what they can have and what freedom is. And I think that that's the big change. And I don't think that the dictatorships that we've had in the past will have any place in the future of the Middle East.
Yeah. But yet we seem to get some statements coming out of Israel saying Mubarak, he mightn't have been that great, but at least we knew where we stood with him. He was going to maintain the peace treaty. How do you feel about not so much the change in regime, but how do you think that will affect the relationship between Israel and Egypt?
I think that the Egyptians are a people with a very long cultured history. And I think that at the end of the day, they will continue in their old way. I think that they'll have a government that's democratically elected, and I think that the government will try and do more for the people. I don't think that by bringing them to war, that the people in Egypt will feel that they're getting anything good out of it. And you have to understand that even though we see that there's a Muslim Brotherhood and a threat of extreme Islam in Egypt, there's also a very 50% of the population that has very democratic and Western principles, and those people are also quite influential, and they haven't left Egypt. When Iran came about, the Ayatollah's regime in Iran, the intelligentsia ran away and left, and they weren't half of the population. So Egypt is different, and the people I know in Egypt tell me we are a different situation. Don't think that we're Iran. We're not Iran. It's a different country and a different situation. I think that's a very interesting approach. So I think that Israel, what they've said is, we don't want to interfere in our neighbours. Our neighbours will decide for themselves what they want. And we'll sit quietly, and that's what they're doing.
So how would you feel about security arrangements on the border between Israel and Gaza, or relations between the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas? Are you relaxed enough about that, or do you think that could end up being the proxy?
Well, they've tried to use the you mean the Egyptian border and Israel?
Yes.
They've tried to use the Sinai, which borders on the south of Israel, the very southern tip of Israel, to that lovely tourist destination, Eilat, which Irish don't go there enough. They should go and visit.
Yes.
And that area is bordering the Sinai, and the Sinai has been used or abused, we could say, by the Hamas regime recently. But I don't think the Egyptian government is stupid, and they may make statements outwardly, but inwardly they'll probably cut it off very quickly, because I don't think they want it coming into Cairo.
Okay. Yeah.
The same as you don't want the people who bombed the buses in Bulgaria coming into Dublin.
Yes. Or the people who bombed the buses in Belfast coming into Dublin. That's
right. That's right.
If I could move on to something, the times that are in it, Daniel, let's go into a bit of class politics. And something that I'm one of the few people I know who've actually covered what I would call the social protest movements in Israel, or the cost of living protests. Because of your profession, am I right in thinking you'd be somewhat insulated to a certain degree than the people who are protesting in the street? How significant are these protests that are taking place over the last 12 months or so in Israel?
Well, I'm not insulated because I'm a doctor, and I deal with the people, and I deal with social medicine.
Yes, I was purely thinking in income terms.
So in income terms, actually, people who work solely in public medicine in Israel don't earn a lot of money. So, but I can't complain. But I'm exposed to what's going on, and there is a certain difficulty, and there's been more. I think that what's happened is that there's a bigger power between the rich, or the haves, and the have-nots. than there was for many years. Israel was a country that was built on socialism, and there weren't very rich people and there weren't very poor people. And now I don't think you have very poor people. Nobody starves in Israel. And I think that most people, I don't think there's really anybody who won't have a roof over their heads. But the conditions have become much more difficult, and the priorities of governments, I think all over the world, in the last 20 years have been to decentralize and remove a lot of socialist principles of giving to the have-nots. And I think that these protests have made a big change. And last year, the protests brought hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets of Israel. And the government accordingly called up a commission, had a commission of inquiry, which gave its conclusions, and the conclusions have been put into action. If you look at the protests that are going on now, it's a very small number of people. So we have 500 or 1,000 people going out onto the streets, doing very dramatic things like burning themselves. But I don't think that it's something that has very much support at this stage in the population. I mean, Israel, unlike Ireland, came out of the financial crisis very well because they made reforms and financial reforms and bank reforms a number of years earlier,
well, Israel
which
had
were
to
very unpopular at the time.
In the 80s, did it?
No, in the 2000s, it was around the early 2000s. The government, Benjamin Netanyahu was the finance minister, and he made those reforms, and he to an extreme personal sacrifice. He was actually thrown out of government because of it. He was very unpopular, but actually those bank reforms are what saved Israel from this huge banking crisis, because many of the reforms were banking reforms as well as social reforms. So I think that in retrospect, people are grateful to him. I think that we've come out of the crisis much better off than many other nations, although it's affecting us, and that's why we have protests on the streets. People are feeling the pinch of the higher prices of oil. There's less employment. There's less jobs around. It's harder to make ends meet, and I think that's the big thing.
So could we then just something that has been prominent in the news is the issue of, is it the Tal Law, of some people exempt from military service? I wonder, is that an extension of the social protest?
It is, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, this is a protest that's been going on for many years, but it's becoming much more extreme. So we have, for people who don't understand what happens, in Israel you have ultra-religious people who would go and learn in seminaries, and then they won't go and do the army. They're excused from doing army service. And there are more and more. At one time, this group of people, ultra-religious people, was very small. And now they're getting much bigger, so that the burden of serving in the army is falling on fewer and fewer people, and the population that should be actually helping out, which is the ultra-religious community, have not been doing their part. So people from the secular community are now saying enough is enough. It's time to change the law, and it's going to happen. No question about it. It's going to happen. It'll happen within. Probably it'll happen as an evolution and as a gradual process over the next 10 years.
Yeah, now it's interesting because when I spoke to people 10 years ago, it was these people don't serve in the military, and that was but now it's they don't work. And it seemed to me that was the real nub of the issue. Not so much the fact that people didn't serve in the military, that was an issue in itself, but the fact that people were entitled to social welfare but weren't obliged to do all those other things that other people on social welfare might be obliged to do, like look for a job. So is that an undercurrent there?
A lot of them don't work, a lot of them didn't work, but a lot of them do work. I think that's, I don't like generalizations. And I think that the reforms that were made by Mr. Netanyahu in the early 2000s, one of them was against people who didn't work, and that they wouldn't feel as much benefit. People who work will feel more benefit, even if it's part-time and they pay tax. They'll feel more benefit than somebody who doesn't work. So you could be in a situation where you have a single mother who gets an allowance, and if she works, she'll lose her allowance. So she'll actually get more by not working than she will if she works. So those type of issues were sorted out by those reforms, and it made it actually beneficial for the person to work and pay taxes rather than them not doing so.
Sure.
So I think that I think that's changed a lot, including with the religious population.
Sure.
And there are many religious people who work very hard and own businesses and pay their taxes and do very well. So I think generalizations are
my experience, particularly of the Haredim in London, is that they were self-employed, or they were entrepreneurs in that sense. They didn't rock up at a factory or in an office block. Last question then. Earlier in the year, I was delighted to meet your son Adam.
Well, he's not my son, he's my brother's son.
My brother's son, I
And his
apologise.
uncle.
Yes, and I thought, I wonder what are the challenges facing that generation. How do you see? I mean, you and I, we're of a different vintage now, but what do you see? The new young Israelis. It's a different world in that sense than it would have been in our time. So, what do you see as the major challenges facing them?
Well, first of all, I think they're a better generation than we were.
Yes. In what respect?
In many respects. I think that the young generation of Ireland is a better generation than we were as well. And I think that they bring lots of hope. I think that they live in an era of communications that we don't know. I mean, most people over the age of 50 hardly use the Twitter and the Facebook and all these things. So they live in this great era of communications. They're very, very interactive, and I think that they will provide a lot of the answers and not the problems. And I'm very proud of the young generation. I think they're a great generation. I look at the young people in Ireland today, and I think that they're absolutely fantastic. And it's a different outlook in life. They're very bright, very happy, and very healthy. And I think they have a very healthy approach. So I think that they'll face the challenges very well. I'm confident of that, and I think they'll make a better world.
Well, Daniel, if they've made the same contribution that the Briscoe family have made to Ireland, it's certainly something to live up to. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very, very much.